A universal language has been much desired by the learned of many ages. It is a thing rather to be wished than hoped for. But it seems the Masons pretend to have such a thing among them. If it be true, I guess it must be something like the pantomimes among the ancient Romans, who were said to be able, by signs only, to express and deliver any oration intelligibly to men of all nations and languages.
Gestures are, as it were, transitory hieroglyphics, for as words pronounced vanish, writings remain. So hieroglyphics, expressed by gestures, are transient, but painted, permanent. As when Periander, being consulted with how to preserve a tyranny, he bid the messengers stand still, and walking in his garden topped all the highest flowers, the meaning of which was the taking off the heads of the chief nobility, thus keeping the rest down.
Good evening, and welcome to tonight's presentation, From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore. Dr. Anderson and his editors, Entink and Northook, unite in propagating the legend that when the building of Babel was arrested by the Most High, the dispersed people went off at various times in tribal companies, travelling north, south, east and west with their Masonic skill, which they found of essential service in settling their new colonies. From Shinar, the science and art were carried to the distant parts of the earth, notwithstanding the confusion of dialects, by the Masonic practice of conversing without speaking, and of knowing each other by signs, words, and tokens, which expedient, according to an old tradition, they contrived upon the dispersion, in case any of them should meet in distant parts who had been before in Shinar. Now, truly soever it may be asserted that the builders of Babel used signs, words, and tokens in the exercise of their craft, and afterwards propagated their existence in all the colonies which they peopled during their migrations. We have no evidence to prove that they were the same signs, words, and tokens which exist in the present system of speculative Masonry. Our traditions are silent on the subject. It is true that in our quiet passage from the second to the third degree, we meet with the technical phrase of greater antiquity than the dispersion, which points out the origin of worldly possessions, and refers us back to an antediluvian period almost beyond the reach of accredited history. In the sacred records, we have, indeed, a brief account of Lamech and his children, which has been amplified by our traditions, and in an ancient Masonic manuscript in the Lansdowne collection of the British Museum, we find a brief description of the first invention of the arts which add a charm to the conventionalities of social life, accompanied by a word or token still existing in speculative Masonry, although this accidental coincidence constitutes no sound authority for believing that all our signs, words, and tokens are of a corresponding antiquity, for there are those who contend that this word is a corruption of the primitive password of the degree. It is quite clear, however, that worldly possessions are more rapidly acquired by the knowledge of a secret method of accumulating wealth, which is unknown to the rest of the community. And accordingly, we find that Tubal-Cain was in possession of the secret of working metals, which is an art that contributes to the comforts of humanity and leads to the acquisition of that rank and dignity which constitutes the chief ambition of worldly men. The traditions of Masonry, however, carry our present system of signs, words, and tokens no further back than the building of Solomon's Temple, and ascribe their invention to the Tyrian workmen who were employed in its construction, for even the chief architect had a Tyrian father, although his mother was a Jewish woman. He was educated in the city of Tyre under the superintendence and instruction of his father, who, it is highly probable, was a sculptor or worker in the precious metals, and brought up his son into his own trade. To this people, then, must be ascribed the erection of that magnificent edifice in its unequalled perfection, and our traditions speak highly of the order and regularity which were uniformly established in their lodges until it was nearly completed. It was owing to a presumed breach of trust that we first hear of any determinate use of signs, words, and tokens, and it has been conjectured, although we have no direct and reliable proof of the fact, that, before that melancholy event, they were used merely as distinctive of title. Several classes of brethren in the lodges of prentice, fellow crafts, masters, excellent, and super excellent, whether Haradim, Menachim, or Giblim, throughout all the gradations of rank. I agree with our late talented brother Husenbeth that
Freemasons never were indebted to the Israelites for their art. Signs, tokens, words do not constitute Freemasonry, but are local marks whereby they know each other, and may be altered or entirely done away without the least injury to scientific Freemasonry. It is with many brothers too absurd a belief, and a still more absurd practice, to build our science upon so shallow a foundation as signs, tokens, and words, which I fear constitute with some the only attainment they look for. That certain signals may be necessary, I do readily allow, but deny that such a mechanism shall constitute a principal part of our institution.
the ancient Phoenicians, from whom the Israelites received the higher instructions in the mysteries of secret societies, had their signs and ceremonials as far as outward forms were necessary, but it would be ill-judged to suppose that those forms constituted the mysteries of their learned secret societies, and this may also be said of corresponding societies in the East Indies, Persia, Egypt, and Greece, which were all in the pale of universality, although they might have greatly differed in their signs, words, and tokens. If we admit that they were adapted by the Tyrians to the passing events at the building of the Temple of Jerusalem, we have equal reason for admitting that at the promulgation of the law under the Jewish dispensation, the fraternity of Freemasons found it prudent, if not in many cases absolutely necessary, to establish landmarks for the satisfaction of the brethren. However originating, it may be enough for us to know that the signs, tokens, and words at present in use among the fraternity have been acknowledged for a long period of time. Nor can there be any question about their correct and perfect adaptation to the several purposes for which their agency is required, and their diversity, when applied to the different degrees, must be considered as one of the essential beauties of the system. They form a series of expressive landmarks which ought never to be changed, and which indeed cannot be changed without introducing confusion and dispute and every species of irregularity. The conjecture of Locke in our epigraph is perfectly sound, for the universal language of Masonry is indeed a system of correspondence by signs, symbols, and ciphers, and its use is characteristic of the science in every country where it is known and practiced. The secret art of writing, says Philip Thickness,
is of great antiquity, and those who have leisure and learning sufficient may see what Polybius has cited from ancient authors who quotes Janaeus, Cleomenes, and Democritus. Besides these, as Bishop Wilkins observes, Julius Africanus and Philomechanicus, two ancient Grecians, have also treated of this subject, and the military significations in use among the Romans are mentioned by Vegetius and Frontinus, and the abbot Trithimus asserts that by means of this universal language he can convey his sentiments at pleasure to a close prisoner 3 miles underground, though he be kept in the strictest custody.
In a society constituted on the plan of Freemasonry, some secret mode of communication is essentially necessary to its faithful transmission from one generation to another. Before the age when printing was discovered, books could not be procured and multiplied without great pains and incessant labour. And our ancient brethren, the great inventive architects and expert builders of the early English era, were too sedulously occupied with their own professional duties to have any leisure for recording their scientific discoveries. And, therefore, they were necessarily obliged to be content with oral communication only. They entrusted their secrets to the breasts of faithful brethren who had been tried and proved and found worthy of confidence. It was thus that this favoured few were distinguished from the uninitiated multitude by possession of an universal language, constructed on principles that admitted of no change, as a permanent link of fraternity. It constituted a mystery that was never penetrated, and, although a brother was able to communicate his sentiments intelligibly at any distance, where squares could be distinguished from circles in open daylight, and in the face of the world, no person unacquainted with the secret could, by any possibility, discover what it meant. Our traditions affirm that, although this mysterious mode of communication has been used by Freemasons from time immemorial, no step was ever taken to enlighten the public or instruct mankind in its true principles till the close of the 18th century, when the first telegraph was constructed by Monsieur Chappé, and it has been recently extended so effectually as to convey intelligence with the speed of lightning from one country to another, although thousands of miles asunder. And hence it is an incontrovertible fact that the world is indebted to the Freemasons for the first idea of a telegraph, which constitutes one, and that no insignificant item, of our glory and celebrity. For we have thus contributed to the advancement of science and the permanent benefit of every people on the face of the earth. For a deep dive into the history, philosophy, and traditions of Freemasonry, subscribe to From the Quarries. You will find hundreds of lectures, presentations, shorts, and other Masonic works written by Freemasons, for Freemasons. Visit FromTheQuarries.com or YouTube at From the Quarries.